This is Wild Rivers Trout Unlimited chapter. Tonight we have a presentation about the White River State Fishery Area by Nate Thomas and Logan Cutler, who are the fishery biologists for both Douglas County and Bayfield County. So welcome, Nate and Logan. And Nate, please take it over.
All right, thanks, John. Yeah, like John said, I'm a fish biologist with the DNR. We manage the inland waters in Bayfield and Douglas County. We'll be talking about the White River, which is a premier trout stream in northwest Wisconsin. It's one of the biggest watersheds for the Lake Superior Basin up here. So we have a lot of responsibilities for managing the fishery as well as property management responsibilities with a lot of state-owned property within the watershed. So the outline of this talk, I'll touch on the background information, and then we'll dive into our brown trout population estimate in the Bibon Swamp section of the White River. Logan will present on that, and he'll also present on the angler creel survey data that we have from our creel survey last year. And then finish up with our results from our trend survey data from electrofishing surveys, and then touch on habitat work that's going on in the White River Fishery area, and then um, present on the Adopt-a-fishery area program that the Wild Rivers chapter of Trout Unlimited has entered into a collaborative agreement with the Wisconsin DNR for property management on the White River State Fishery area. So the White River, it's a unique system. Um, so it's one of 8 rivers in Wisconsin that have over 40 miles of class 1 or 2 trout water. And that map there in the upper right is showing the main stem of the White River, which is highlighted by that pink purple line. Um, as you can see, it flows through a lot of public land, which is the green shaded area. Um, and because of that, there's a lot of areas of the river that are not developed. And actually, there's a 15-mile section of the river right in the middle there that um, is inaccessible by public road. It's Sutherland Bridge down to Bibon Road Bridge, and it's the longest reach of high quality trout water in Wisconsin that's not accessible by road. So a unique fishery recreational opportunity for a lot of its canoe access and kayak access floating that section of the river. And a lot of the watershed, like I said, is flows through public land. Um, if you can see my cursor here, the White River fishery area is this section of green shaded area that's right here. And then this middle section is the Bibon Swamp State Natural Area. And these are all both DNR owned lands. And then down here in the lower section, right before the Ashland County line, is more DNR land that's part of the White River fishery area as well. And then further downstream in Ashland County, there's actually more DNR land along the White River in the White River wildlife area. So there's a lot of public land within along the White River, which is great. Like I mentioned, Wild Rivers Trout Unlimited for many years has been helpful in assisting the DNR with property management and survey work on the White River. And then just last December, just a couple months ago, we entered into agreement for them to adopt the White River fishery area, and I'll describe more on that at a later slide. Um, but in general, that middle section through the Bibon Swamp State Natural Area is kind of the area where a lot of angling happens. That's where people are targeting trophy brown trout. Like I said, usually by canoe. Just a unique, really unique fishery. Produces some really big fish. All right, Logan.
Yeah, give me a second to um, swap the swap the share over to me. Just switch this. How's that look to you guys? Um, yeah, so in the Bibon Swamp section of the White River, we do population estimates somewhat regularly. I'll talk a little bit more about that schedule moving forward in a couple slides here. Um, but generally speaking, the main population estimate section that we do is the from Sutherland Bridge down 4 miles downstream. If you're familiar with the area, it's ends a little upstream of the primitive campsites there, kind of in the middle of that stretch. These take place in late winter or early spring. Last year, I think it was in March. This year, probably going to be a little later, given the type of winter we're having and the ice cover that we've got. But you never know. um, for sampling these fish, we use that mini boom electrofishing boat that's shown in the top right corner there. It's just a small John boat that's set up with the generator, electrofishing box, and electrofishing equipment on there. Um, and the survey takes place over 2 days, where the first day of that survey, we're running that 4 mile stretch, shocking brook and brown trout as we go. And each of those fish we're clipping a fin on as a mark. And then the following day, we come back, fish that same or shock that same section. And based on the kind of proportion of the fish that we catch on that second day that have that fin clip versus ones that don't, we can get a total population estimate for that 4 mile stretch. This is kind of the history of those population estimates on that Sutherland Bridge station. So we have the year on the x-axis there, dating back to the 80s, and then on the y-axis, the height of those dots are the number of brown trout per mile, and this is targeting those adult brown trout, generally over about 6 inches is what we typically use, those at least age 2 fish. So kind of big things to note is these adult densities are were pretty dang high through the early 2000s. When we're talking, yeah, 400 to 800 adult brown trout per mile of stream. We're doing pretty well there, especially when you consider the size of some of these fish, which we'll get into a little bit more later. But then in kind of the early 2010s, there were a few flooding events that led to fish kills, big summer rains that led to low oxygen. And following those flooding events, the population estimate came out quite a bit lower in 2014 and 2015, at about 100 brown trout per mile or less. So it's a big change from what it was previously. And as a result, a more restrictive regulation with a one trout over 18 inches was put in place on the system. So then when we went back there this past spring of 2024, we were really interested to see how that regulation was panning out, what the population was doing, if we were seeing some recovery, or if we were kind of looking at maintaining these lower densities into the future, or if we're getting some recovery. So luckily, when we were in there this past spring, not quite what we used to see, but some substantial recovery as far as the density goes at 241 adult brown trout per mile. And the size of these fish is really something to talk about. The number of 20-inch or larger brown trout that we saw was really impressive out there, something that I'd never laid my eyes on. So definitely moving in the right direction there. The plan moving forward with this population estimates, we will repeat that same station in 2025, make sure that what we saw last spring is still holding true. It wasn't some kind of fluke or something with the survey. Kind of double check ourselves on that one. As well as we want to sample the station just upstream of there, from Bowlin Creek down 4 miles once again, which gets you almost down to Sutherland Bridge. So get a little bit wider range on this system. See if those trends are holding true up there as well. And then moving forward, we're implementing a new sampling schedule on the system with these population estimates, where we'll sample once every 6 years. Previously, as you could have noticed on that previous slide, we were sampling 2 consecutive years every 10 years. So we get that back-to-back information, but then we have a 9-year period where we don't have uh, a population estimate at all. So we're moving forward. We're going to shorten that up to one year, and then we'll sample it again in 6 years. So we get a little bit more frequency without having to double up in consecutive years there. Another big thing that we've been working on in the White River fishery area and the Bibon Swamp here is an angler creel survey going on the main stem of the White primarily. We started this in spring of 2024 using trail cameras and survey kiosks. This is a method it's been used by a handful of other DNR crews throughout the state. Kind of started up in Forest and Florence counties with Greg Matzke. He's done quite a bit of that work, but there's been other ones throughout the state, including on the Brill River as well in this area. But this is a pretty cost-effective alternative. In the past, these creel surveys on the White had been done by a full-time creel clerk that was out there surveying anglers, interviewing anglers. But you can imagine hiring a full-time technician for the whole summer is pretty costly. And it wasn't occurring anywhere else in the state. It was just the White River essentially that had that going on. So with this survey starting in 2024, we switched this trail camera and survey kiosk method, which is much more cost effective than would have been done before, but we can get a lot of the same information out of it. And there was actually some survey work and survey kiosks done in some previous creel surveys on this system as well that we could also use to compare directly to. But these couplings of trail cameras and survey kiosks were placed at 4 different spots along the main stem of the river: Bibon Road, Goldberg's Landing, the Sutherland Bridge, the Sajac Springs walk-in area just upstream of Sutherland Road, White River Road walk-in access, and then the Pike River Road bridge. And with those cameras, there was kind of two ways that we were deploying those. I believe 4 of those sites we had as time lapse over a parking lot, like you can see in that top picture there. We're taking a picture every 15 minutes, so we can get a count of how many cars are parked in the lot. Or in certain circumstances, like at Goldberg Bridge, as shown in that bottom picture, we couldn't really get a good full view over all the parking areas. So instead of the time lapse, we were using motion detection to catch people moving in and out at those access locations. But either way, there we were using that trail cam information to get a number of anglers or a number of vehicles at that site to estimate total angler effort. And then those cameras were coupled with survey cards that anglers would fill out after they were done fishing for the day. And some of the main things that we're getting off of those were total hours fished, some information on catch and harvest for each species there, and then angler demographics like angling type and the county of residence or state of residence. And when you combine the information that we get from the cameras and what we get from the survey cards, we were able to, the biggest things that we're able to estimate are total catch and harvest, which I'll go through in a little bit, as well as reporting rate. So the percentage of people that were actually filling out the survey cards, and that'll be really important moving forward, so that we can estimate that angling effort and some of these different metrics at different sites where we have kiosks, but not the camera. And just to kind of see that reporting rate throughout the system and how that may impact any biases there. So going through a few of those results for the creel survey from 2024 so far. And I will say there's some cleaning up that we'll still do with this. This isn't completely final yet, but this is going to be a pretty good view of what we've seen so far. Where in 2024 we had overall 8.6% reporting rate, which all things considered is pretty good. Other surveys statewide have seen about 11%. So we're in the same ballpark. I do think that once we go through and clean up the data a little bit more, we'll be even closer to that mark. Because I know for a fact, especially at that Goldberg site, there's likely a few of those individuals that we'll be able to pin down as hunters, not anglers, and that'll potentially bump up that reporting rate a little bit. And also night fishing. Night fishing is a pretty big thing, especially around the hex hatch on the white. And some anglers may be a little less likely to report when they're coming up out of the swamp in the middle of the night. We do have some reflectors on those boxes to hopefully encourage people to remember and get their attention when they're coming back at their headlights. But that's certainly something that can influence that reporting rate a little bit. Looking at angler effort by site now, there was a total of over 4,600 angler hours spent on this stretch of the white in 2024, as compared to about 3,300 in 2014 and 2015. Although admittedly that 2014-15 survey was that done by that in-person creel clerk, so a little bit different methods there. But regardless, we did see quite a bit higher amount of angler efforts on this system than back in 2014 and 2015, which kind of came to a surprise to me because a lot of what we've been hearing is there's just less and less anglers on the system as a whole. But yeah, maybe that is the case in 2014, 2015 was just a particularly low year. Or it could be just differences in the survey method too, but we'll get a better idea of that as we move forward with this survey as well. But the site with the most angler effort overall was that Sutherland Bridge Station, which is kind of the center of where a lot of those hex hatch fishermen are targeting. So that wasn't a huge surprise to us. Looking at overall angler hours and angler effort throughout the season, it starts relatively high in spring at the beginning of the season. There's a big peak right around that hex hatch in late June, early July, and then kind of tapers off throughout the system as anglers just sort of lose interest in these trout fisheries throughout the season. But we still had good success from anglers later in the season too, which is interesting. And these trends are really, really similar to previous creel surveys. And then last of the results for the creel survey here, overall in 2024, there were a little shy of 6,500 brown trout caught, averaging 1.38 brown trout caught per hour. And out of that, those just about 6,500 brown trout caught, there were 187 harvested. So pretty low harvest overall. Not a big surprise with the one fish 18-inch minimum regulation that's on the system. But there is some harvest going on still. And the most interesting thing to me was that there were over 2,300 brook trout caught at about 0.5 per hour. And that compared to previous creel surveys, the 2005 creel, which was done using relatively similar methods with those survey cards, we had 4 times higher brook trout catch rates than in 2005. So there's definitely some changes going on in the system. A lot more brook trout around than there used to be. And out of all those fish, none were harvested, but that shouldn't be a huge surprise with an 18-inch minimum. Those fish could be out there, but that's a truly special brookie if you're getting an 18-inch brookie in a stream. And then moving forward with the creel, our plan is to repeat these methods in 2025, but with 6 additional locations. So we'll sample those same 6 locations that we did this year, but get more coverage, especially in those higher positions in the watershed, up off of a couple sites off White River Road, and then one all the way up to Lake 2 on the South Fork of the White River. So we get kind of a more comprehensive look of angler effort throughout the system, see if there's any sort of gradients going on from the upstream reaches to down below. And then just like that Bibon Swamp population estimate. We're going to switch this rotation to doing a creel survey like this once every 6 years as well for the same reasons as we're changing that the brown trout population estimate as well. Nate, I'll hand it back to you.
Sorry about that. All right. You guys see that?
Yes.
All right. Um, so yeah, in addition to the population estimate survey that was happening every 10 years, which will be every 6 years going forward, we do more regular sampling within the watershed. These are our trend surveys. And there we have 6 different stations, and they're shown here by the red lines on this map. Some of them are hard to see, but 5 of these stations are in tributaries to the White River. It's the South Fork, the East Fork, Long Lake Branch, 18 Mile, and 20 Mile Creek. So this, I'll grab my laser here. Hopefully you guys can see that. This red line up here at the top, that's the East Fork. This is our South Fork station. And then down by Grandview, we have the Long Branch Station, 18 Mile Creek Station, and 20 Mile Creek Station. So those 5 stations are um, sites that we use a barge electrofishing unit where we're wading rivers. These creeks are smaller here, shallow, so we're able to wade. And a picture of a barge electrofisher there is in the top right. And that unit is just pulled through the water, and then um, uh, people are out front of it using electrofishing gear to sample fish. And then there's one other trend station, and it's actually the same station as the Sutherland population estimate station. We revisit and sample that station every other year, same time during the late winter, early spring, and it's just a single pass. So we don't do a mark recap, but we just do a single pass survey at the same site there, and that's shown here by this longer red line on the river here. And that's done, of course, with that mini boom electrofishing unit. So these surveys, the wadable stations up in the headwaters and the tributaries, they're targeting the age 0 brook and brown trout, young year fish to monitor recruitment, evaluating year class strength, young fish essentially, that were born that spring and then have survived throughout the summer. We do this monitoring in late summer. These fish are usually about 2.5 to 4 inches long, depending. Picture in the top right shows a couple young year brook trout and a young year brown trout. You can see the size there. So that's the primary focus of those wadable trend surveys, and then the non-wadable survey, again, it's targeting the adult fish that are in that fishable population where there's a lot of angling effort. And from that survey, just a single pass survey, we're able to get relative abundance information, so our catch rate of number of brown trout caught per mile, and then size structure information. So what length classes, size classes are in the sample the subsample that we collect, and kind of what proportion of fish are above a certain size, that type of thing. So It's a way to essentially keep a little bit closer tab on the fishery without having to do a full scale mark recap survey. And this slide here shows the results of those weightable surveys. So each panel is a tributary stream. So at the top we have the East Fork on the left, 18 Mile Creek in the middle, Long Lake Branch on the right, and then the bottom is the South Fork on the left and 20 Mile Creek on the right. And this is through time. Most of these surveys were started around 2006, 2007. The yellow diamond is the brown trout um, catch rate in number of brown trout per mile, and then that line, that yellow line, is a smooth running average trend line fit to that data. And the brook trout is the blue diamonds and the blue line. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of variation, which is typical when monitoring recruitment to a fish population. Um, but there's definitely some trends that you see overall through time over the last almost 20 years. Some interesting takeaways of these different streams. 18 Mile Creek has kind of maintained this fairly even mix of brown and brook trout. Um, as you can see there, that kind of has stayed true through time. What's also interesting, and it's interesting that we're seeing this further down the watershed, but brook trout relative abundance has increased for these age zero fish in general in the Long Lake Branch, 20 Mile Creek, and the South Fork. Um, as you can see, these blue lines in general are going up Long Branch, 20 Mile, and the South Fork. Um, and the South Fork is likely a source of recruitment of is likely a source of fish for that Bibon Swamp fishery further downstream in the main stem. So potentially there's something going on there with elevated recruitment of brook trout in the South Fork and what we're seeing in our angler catch rates further downstream in the watershed. And then in general, you'll notice the scale on the y-axis is different on these plots and quite a bit higher number of fish per mile on the South Fork plot. It's a factory of brown trout, just tons of age zeros that we catch in there and likely providing a lot of fish for other parts of the watershed, most likely that Bibon Swamp fishery. Some of these fish were born up there in the South Fork. So it's not been confirmed to a certain, there's some potentially some more work to be done there to kind of confirm that, but it's likely going on to some extent. And yeah, our catch rates are 2,000 to almost 8,000 fish per mile over the last 20 years or so. So um, it's excellent rearing lot of good rearing habitat for these young fish in the South Fork. And this slide here shows the results from the non-weightable trend survey. Again, that's the same site that we do our population estimate in the Bibon Swamp, Sutherland Bridge, downstream 4 miles. The plot on the upper right is just the relative abundance, catch rate, number of brook and brown trout per mile. The yellow is brown trout, brook trout are blue again. Um, there's been overall maybe a slight decrease in brown trout per mile that we get in that survey. Um, but quite variable, and this is a single pass survey, so it's not as I guess accurate as a mark recap estimate, but it does give us an idea of overall trends and what's going on in the system. And like I said, it provides just more data more frequently doing this single pass survey every other year. Very few brook trout are sampled in that survey. We get a few, which is it'd be interesting to see what if we see a change there. Could be something with some time of year when we're sampling this. There's obviously brook trout there. Um, anglers are catching them, but I think a lot of the anglers are going upstream of Sutherland Bridge, and this survey is downstream, and that could be part of it. Also just seasonal habitat use that between brook and brown trout, and maybe these brook trout are kind of occupying, different parts of the river that time of year in the late winter, spring. But um, in the plot on the bottom right is size structure information. So this is from that non-wadable trend site, the percent of brown trout that are equal to or greater than 15 inches that we catch in this survey. And as you can see, that's overall looks to be increasing. The highest value was observed in our 2023 survey. 63% of fish were greater than or equal to 15 inches, and 11% were actually greater than or equal to 18 inches. So, like Logan mentioned, the size structure is pretty high. There's that trophy potential, and um, we handled a lot of fish over 20 inches. So it's able to produce big browns, which makes it a pretty unique and popular fishery. So moving on to the habitat work, like I mentioned, a lot of this is done in the White River fishery area. So that's that property that's in the upstream extent of the watershed. It's mostly located along the South Fork of the White River. And most of the habitat work, there's been some in-stream structures and in-stream structure maintenance and repair that's happened over the last few decades. But more so recently, a lot of the work has focused on buckthorn control. Buckthorn are invasive species and end up dominating some of the riparian areas along the South Fork. A monoculture of buckthorn, and not a healthy riparian area. So starting about oh 20 years ago or so, there's been fairly consistent buckthorn control work implemented in the along the South Fork of the White River, and these three pictures lined up here on the top are just kind of showing. The one on the left is some of these areas are just a wall of buckthorn. That's all buckthorn there for the most part, and um, so that's we did a lot of control effort, mechanical removal, uh, chemical spraying, cut stump treatments, and getting that buckthorn out of there, and then replanting with desired native species. A lot of tamaracks have been planted and have done quite well. And as you can see on the picture on the far right, that's several years. I think actually that area might be closer to 15 years or so after a lot of this work happened. And as you can see, a pretty healthy riparian zone there with a lot of a diverse woody species along the stream there. And then a big part of this work is then revegetation of desired species through tree planting once an area is cleared out of buckthorn. And this essentially is trying to promote and restore that riparian area to desired native tree species. But in addition, getting these areas revegetated with those species then also helps prevent buckthorn from recolonizing. So a lot of the work is mostly followed up by this tree planting. And to date, almost about 6,500 tree seedlings have been planted along the river in this area. And we hope to continue a lot of this work. It's kind of a long-term commitment. I'm talking in decades when we're looking at different, pictures before, during, after, and but with a lot of folks in the Rural Fisheries Management Office putting a lot of effort into this with help from Trout Unlimited and other volunteers. It seems like we're making a big difference there. So, um, plan is to continue this work and keep targeting those areas that still have buckthorn infestation along the South Fork of the White River. So, I'll briefly touch on the Adopt-a-fishery program that I mentioned. Essentially, this is a DNR program that involves stakeholders in the management of a DNR owned property. So the program is called Adopt a Fish or Wildlife Area. There's a lot of adopt a wildlife area contracts that are currently ongoing. I do know of one other, there's probably more, but one other fishery area from a Trout Unlimited chapter over in southeast Wisconsin. But like I mentioned, Wild Rivers chapter of Trout Unlimited, which is represents the northwest part of the state. We have entered into a contract with them that we finalized that a couple months ago, and this program basically requires a volunteer group to offer a minimum of 100 hours of volunteer labor or a donation of $3,000 per year that goes towards management of the resources on the state-owned property. Um, and the contract is for 3 years, and it can just be continually renewed if both parties want to keep going with it. So we initiated our first contract, and our first field season will be this year in 2025. And our plans are to there will be volunteer opportunities, but also donations to help us purchase equipment to finish out our creel survey this year on the white. Also purchase trees for our tree planting events and um, tagging and marking equipment to tag trout in the watershed and mark them, and as part of a fish movement study. So that's the kind of where the money will be going towards in 2025. And like I said, we'll continue our buckthorn control work, our tree planting. I envision that being kind of an annual thing as part of this Adopt-a-fishery contract. And then with the tree planting, there's a great volunteer opportunity for Trout Unlimited and other local stakeholders to join us in planting trees. So um, that's the plan for the Adopt-a-fishery area. Super excited about it. I think it'll be a great opportunity for the DNR as well as Wild Rivers Trout Unlimited, and get them some recognition for, at this point, more than a couple decades of a lot of work that Wild Rivers TU has put into the White River fishery. So, um, with that, that's all we got. Definitely feel free to reach out to us. There's our contact information, or John with Wild Rivers TU.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Nate. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And Logan, terrific. And we're excited to be part of the Adopt a State Fishery Area with the White River, which is a terrific resource. Again, thank you for your time tonight.